WNYC Studios is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Bridget Bergen, senior reporter in the WNYC and Gothamist newsroom, filling in for Brian today. Coming up on today's show, we'll talk to the head of the nurses union, as the strike is now over at 2 out of the 3 hospital systems. Nurses at Mount Sinai and Montefiore approved the new contract, while their colleagues in the New York Presbyterian system rejected the deal, so they're still on strike. We'll talk about why the discrepancy and what's in terms of the deals at the 2 hospital systems where the nurses voted to approve them. Plus, yesterday was Tin Cup Day in Albany, where local leaders, including New York City Mayor, head to the Capitol to ask the state legislature for more money. We'll hear how it went for Mayor Mamdani, his first time going through this experience in his new role. And we'll wrap today's show by hearing what you've been following in the Winter Olympics. Are you on the Quad God train? If you don't know who I'm talking about, stay tuned. We will explain. But first, next Tuesday, early voting will begin for primary voters in Texas. Among Democrats, one race to watch is the matchup of U.S. House Representative Jasmine Crockett against State Representative James Tallarico. They're vying for their party's U.S. Senate nomination. It's just one early test to see what style of Democratic Party leadership is resonating most effectively with voters, as the party scrambles to define itself ahead of the midterm elections. Last year, Atlantic staff writer Mark Leibovich set out to explore key questions about the Democrats' viability after embarrassing 2024 losses. Are they capable of regaining some measure of power despite themselves, he wrote. That inquiry set him on a journey across the country to talk with Democratic candidates, party leaders, operatives, and my personal favorite, voters, about the state of the party and what it needed to do to win in these upcoming elections. The result is his latest piece for The Atlantic that, as much as anything, really underscores the many challenges facing the Democratic brand. It's headlined, "The Democrats Aren't Built for This." Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic and author of 5 books, including his latest, Thank You for Your Servitude, joins me now. Mark, welcome back to WNYC.
Good to be back with you.
And Mark, just let's start out talking about what you set out to do here and how you tackled the assignment.
Well, it was kind of a big, unruly assignment, which is essentially, last summer, I guess probably maybe August, maybe September, I was sort of assigned the project of taking the measure of the Democratic Party and all of the sprawling mess of disenchantment and potential and, defiance and sort of just how appalled everyone was at what was going on in the country and how somehow they were going to reconstitute themselves into a viable party at a time when they found themselves very much in the wilderness in the aftermath of 2024 and losing the House and the Senate and really being back on their heels. So, essentially the way I went about this is how I would go about normally something like this, which is just to go out and talk to as many people as possible. And as you said, it was a pretty diverse group of candidates and operatives and voters and people everywhere. And this was sort of the result. I think obviously I didn't expect a sort of tidy ribbon around the conclusion,
Sure.
And there wasn't one. But look, these are scary times, and this is one of the 2 major parties. And, if there is an alternative to Donald Trump, this is it.
Yeah. This is a real meaty piece. As you mentioned, you're with several different candidates across the country.
Right.
Some parts of it actually made me laugh out loud. I'm wondering.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. It's not just doom and gloom. There's a lot of tongue in cheek. How did you decide which candidates you wanted to spend time with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, there are literally hundreds to choose from, and it's kind of the idea of a political party being singular is kind of, it's a non sequitur, or it's a misnomer in some ways, because
Sure.
obviously it's just a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of ideas and so forth. I follow the news closely. I read up on pretty much anything I could find about a lot of the races going on there, a lot of what the Democrats are trying to do to sort of make some sense of where they were and what they've been through and where they're headed. And just went out and sort of went to what was interesting and what seemed interesting. I mean, there are some really compelling races and candidates out there. I mean, you mentioned Texas. There's a great Senate race in Maine, Michigan, really all over the country.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was no litmus test really, except whatever I found interesting, and hopefully that translated into an edifying read.
Well, we're going to get into some of those races in a moment, but, I want to talk about one of the ideas that you wrestle with pretty early in this piece, which is this notion that Democrats are becoming the party of elitists. I think that's something we've heard more and more of in recent election cycles. It's certainly something, the Bernie Sanders wing of the party is hammered. And you zero in on some of these contradictions that are, as I mentioned, kind of funny. You have Democrats saying that this is an existential fight to save democracy. And then you have staff complaining about a return to work policy. Can you tell us that story and what it said to you?
Yeah, I mean, the story leads with that. I mean, essentially, the Democratic National Committee, which is this, how you would describe it as, I guess, sort of like the institutional head of the party, and they're sort of seen as being in charge, but really they have limited power, and they're trying to somehow be the face of the party. But it's a huge operation. Ken Martin is the chair. He just took over. He's been involved in Democratic politics in Minnesota for much of his life, and now he is the new head of the party. And you have this existential crisis, as you mentioned, and Democrats have never wanted to win more and have never been more frustrated. And then you had this controversy where maybe 2 months ago, maybe in November, I think it was, Ken put out a memo saying, by the way, our work from home policy, which was a very generous work from home policy, basically anyone could work whatever they wanted, however long they wanted to, was going to end in February. Everyone was going to have to return to the office full time. And there was a mini revolt, and the DNC Workers Union, I'm not sure what the formal local is, but they complained and they released a statement and they sent it to the New York Times. And there was this big kerfuffle about, how dare, Democratic National Committee employees were very upset about having to return to work, which was a very, very disconcerting look to a lot of the Democrats out there who are thinking, why are people in our party, at the head of our party, having this battle now when we have so many other, massive existential fish to fry. That's a weird metaphor, I will say. But but there was I kind of unfurled in the top the whole controversy of it and how Ken has just become this beleaguered sort of figure at the top who was trying to sort of keep all of these constituencies together. And it's a pretty thankless job, and so unfortunately, Ken did sign up for this, and here he is. But yeah, that's exactly kind of the pampered attitude that a lot of people accuse the Democrats of having, and sometimes they really do live up to their, these caricatures quite a bit, I think, to their detriment.
For those of you just joining us, this is the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Bridget Bergen, senior reporter in the WNYC and Gothamist newsroom. I'm filling in for Brian today, and my guest is Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic. We're talking about his latest article, The Democrats Aren't Built for This. And listeners, one of the key questions Mark asks in this piece is whether Democrats have a plan for this moment, and we want to hear from you. How do you see the performance of Democrats as we head into midterm elections? If you're a Democratic voter with a big primary, whether it's here in New York, in New Jersey, or anybody listening in Texas or Maine, we want to hear from you and want to hear your perspective on those races, how the candidates' messages are landing with you. Or maybe you're just someone who is watching how Democrats in office are responding to this moment in Minnesota or on the Hill during oversight hearings this week of ICE or the Epstein files. Are Democrats built for this moment? Why or why not? You can call or text us. The number is 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-WNYC. 433-9692. Or if you have a question for my guest, Atlantic staff writer Mark Leibovich, give us a call. We want to hear from you. Mark, a lot of Democratic groups have tried to make sense of where the party failed and how they need to regroup. You came up with a term that we'll share, which is autopsy porn. What stood out to you about the many white papers and assessments that you read about the failings in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so just to be clear, that was a joke. This is not porn in any way or any definition of the term. Essentially, I mean, Democrats are extremely good at white papers and full-on data-rich, 100-page reports on what went wrong, what we can learn, the lessons, and so forth. And literally dozens of these came out. Like, and not small things either, just massive things. And I have them all piled high on my desk at the Atlantic, which I guess I'll have to, maybe I'll just paper my bathroom wall with them now. But essentially, Democrats, I mean, if just the raw tonnage of after-action reports could be the path to salvation, I mean, Democrats would be set up for years. I mean, essentially, one of the points I made is that, parties that find themselves in the wilderness, which tends to be parties that lose presidential elections, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, are always saying, okay, we've got to sort of reflect, we've got to sort of see what went wrong, we got to really do some soul searching and do an autopsy and put out these reports and have a plan. That's not really how this works. I mean, again, it's sort of a sprawling party, and the parties are just defined essentially by their candidates and their voters, and voters pick the candidates. And I do think that, when Democrats lost the presidential election in 2004, George W. Bush was reelected, John Kerry lost, Democrats were thinking, well, wow, how are we ever going to get back in touch with America? Who on earth is our solution? And, no one saw Barack Obama coming, just like when Republicans lost to Obama, when Mitt Romney lost to Obama in 2012, they were thinking, wow, they actually put out something called an autopsy, and everyone ignored it and basically did the opposite, voters meaning, and they nominated Donald Trump, who no one saw as the answer, and then all of a sudden he shocked the world. So essentially parties are defined by the people that win the voters' imagination and who they decide. But in the meantime, there is all kinds of churning and report writing and hand-wringing that sort of leads up to it. I think the Democrats have sort of gone at this a lot longer than usual in this cycle, and that's sort of one of the things I wanted to kind of put an end to, or at least, say has maybe gone on longer than it needs to.
Among the many white papers you consumed, you do highlight the research of Scott Ferson and specifically his conversations with voters in rural Canton, Ohio. Why did you think that was important to sort of call attention to? What did it tell you about some of the missteps?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Scott is not someone I knew before. I mean, I've been covering politics for a long time, but this is the first time I'd come across him. He's a Democratic operative up in Massachusetts, and he essentially was working on a book called How Democrats Lost America. It's coming out in April. It looked really interesting, and he sort of gave me a sneak preview of a lot of his data. He and his team interviewed over 1,000 voters across the country. So they have a pretty deep sense, I think, of where Democrats sort of maybe have gone wrong and how voters are perceiving them and so forth. And, it was sort of this, it sounded like a real, very deep confirmation of how Democrats have, in fact, lost the working class, which has become kind of an article of faith, which is just bizarre, given that the Democrats have been sort of aligned with the working class for much of their history. And then all of a sudden, I guess it was sort of Donald Trump comes along, and there are polls now that say a majority of Americans think that Republicans, led by a billionaire, Donald Trump, are far more in tune with the needs of working class Americans than Democrats are, which is quite damning and quite shocking, and was very shocking to a lot of the people who sort of run these studies, but even like to Ken Martin himself, who said, it's just a damning indictment of where we are. So, I think if there is a core argument here, and something that Scott Ferson really did underscore in his research, it is how far Democrats have drifted from whatever the ideals of the working class that sort of captured their imagination 30 years ago, 40 years ago, really throughout much of its history.
Sure. We have a listener who texts some pushback to that broader idea. The listener writes, I feel like the whole thing of calling Democrats elites is the result of years of conservatives denigrating education. They've convinced people that being able to speak a coherent sentence is elitism. Any response to that?
Well, I think she's right. I mean, I think certainly the Republican, the conservative echo chamber has been pounding on that for years, for decades. I mean, going back to the 60s. And the fact is, though, that, I mean, if you look at education levels, if you look at income levels, those groups are predominantly Democratic now, which was very, very much the opposite, as recently as 20 years ago. So whether it's just sort of the effectiveness of communications on the right or from the right, conservative TV, conservative media like Fox, that kind of thing, it has over time certainly taken hold. And I don't know, I mean, I think Democrats do a fair amount to sort of bring on and perpetuate this perception themselves. But I think whatever it is, I mean, the data says that this is who Democrats are these days, and this is who they're perceived to be.
Mark, so many of the reports you focused on were looking at how, Democrats had been losing voters, working class voters, and yet by last November, we did see Democrats pick up some key wins, some of which we've talked a lot about on this show, 2 governor seats with Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, and of course, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Do you feel like the through line, if there was one in those races, was that appeal to economic populism?
It does seem to be. I mean, I think another through line, frankly, they're just very good candidates, and I think that they were very good for the places they were running in. I think the Mamdani was a little different just because New York is such a, it's just a very different political bubble than any state is, right? I mean, it's a Democratic city. I mean, it's unlikely that, a Republican could get elected in New York right now. And it's probably unlikely that Abigail Spanberger would get elected against Zohran Mamdani right now. But I do think that, look, I mean, Democrats have an incredible thing going for them right now, which is what parties who are out of power have, which is that people are pretty sick and not very happy at all with the party in power. And I think that has happened before. I think the center of gravity of politics is such that that the minority party, the party out of power, is at an advantage in the midterms. And we certainly, I think, saw that last November. But I think we're seeing that now in polls, a lot of retirements and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, look, the best thing Democrats have going for them right now in a weird way is the current state of the Republican Party.
Just to push back a little bit on this question about, could a Mamdani win a statewide race in Virginia? You wrote about that. Part of the model that his campaign applied started with talking to working class Trump voters about they wanted to see from their government. Do you think that, a candidate who might be, seen as a socialist, a progressive, couldn't use that strategy to win elsewhere?
Oh, I think it definitely could apply elsewhere. I mean, very, very much so. And I think, look, I think that Mamdani, while he won in New York, and I think is very well suited to winning in New York, I think the lessons of him are extremely transferable to a lot of candidates across the country. And I think a lot of those candidates are trying to take those lessons. I mean, I think part of it being the incredible laser focus on affordability and economic and cost of living issues and so forth. But also, I mean, political performance, elite political performers, and I think certainly Mamdani proved himself to be one last year, are someone that people take lessons from. So, no, I think it's transferable. I just think that his politics in particular at this moment were very well suited to the demographics of New York City.
Mark Leibovich is staff writer at The Atlantic. And Mark, we have a whole line of people interested in talking to you about this topic. I'm going to start with Sharon in Manhattan. Sharon, you're on WNYC.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My question is, from all of the research and talking that you have done, is there any way to explain the fear in the Senate and in the House of just taking a stand and saying, no, that we have power here. We have constitutional power, and we really can say, no, this is not the way it goes. And what is the problem with standing up? Do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I certainly have an opinion about the lack of standing up. And I think, unfortunately, this starts with the president's own party. I mean, I wrote a whole book about it in 2022 about just the dereliction of the Republican Party to be the first line of defense or any line of defense against Donald Trump. And I mean, I think, unfortunately, Republicans have really continued to renounce that party, renounce that sort of constitutional power they have at a time when the party theoretically would have more power than ever. I think there might be some loosening, a little bit of weakening of Trump's hold on the Republican Party in recent months, but not that much to a point. But I also think Democrats are learning that voters are going to punish them if they're perceived as being weak and not standing up and being firmer and using whatever constitutional or unconstitutional, or just power, whatever power they have. Because either way, I mean, they do feel, and if you look at Democratic voters, one of the reasons they're so frustrated with their leaders is that they feel like Trump and Republicans have just repeatedly steamrolled them. And I think, as we've seen, and I think a lot of the leadership has had struggles with this, I think they're learning this lesson the hard way. But I think going forward, I think more and more Democrats are taking the lesson that, fighting not just for fighting's sake, but really for just tooth and nail for preserving whatever rights that they can fight for is going to be paramount to their efforts going to the midterms.
Mark, just this week we saw in New Jersey, Ana Lilia Mejia won that really crowded primary race to become the Democratic House nominee for Cheryl's former seat. She's a Bernie Sanders acolyte. We have a caller who wants to talk about that race. Let's try Diane in Wayne, New Jersey. Diane, you're on WNYC.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my call. So I am a volunteer for Ana Lilia Mejia. I live in Wayne, New Jersey, which is part of CD 11. Our previous House rep is Governor Cheryl. I knocked on hundreds of doors. My fellow Democrats told me they were scared, but many also told me they were angry because they felt the Democrats weren't fighting Trump and fighting this authoritarianism. And when I spoke to them about Ana Lilia Mejia and explained the way she's been fighting Trump, the way she's been fighting his immigration programs, and the fact that she helped to pass the $15 minimum wage in Trenton, helped pass paid sick leave in Trenton, that kind of populist message combined with the fact that the people that are fighting Trump the strongest are people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, that wing of the Democratic Party, the House progressives. That message won them over. They understand that there are some Democrats that are strong and that are fighting Trump and fighting for ordinary working families. And that is why Ana Lilia Mejia got so many votes.
Diane, thanks for that perspective. And Mark, I'd love to get your take on that race. Is there any reason to read it as a bellwether for other parts of the country?
It's hard to say. Obviously, every district, especially when you get into a granular congressional race like that, is going to be different. And obviously, it's a big field. It's very. I would probably not take too big of a lesson there, except to say that everyone has a theory on what kind of candidate the Democrats should nominate, and by should I mean people sitting back, sort of analytically about what best suited to win over swing voters to win a general election. There are some that say that the more energized voters are always on the left, but there are others who say that when you have very, very progressive candidates who are very vocal, it scares people on the center. So there's I don't know, it's hard. I think it's hard in a smaller sort of population like that. But I also think that, look, I think every district is different, and I think clearly there's a lot of real progressive energy out there. That seems to be where a whole lot of the power of the party is right now. And if you sort of go across the country, there are very few Democrats today who can just blow out an entire arena. And Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are two of them. Mamdani could be one, but there aren't that many. And, these are all either Democratic Socialist or Democratic Socialist adjacent candidates. And you see that over and over again. The question is whether that can translate into victory in a general election in a district that is not, narrowly, say like New York City. Like how would something like that play in a maybe purpler area like, say, Virginia?
Well, we're going to talk more about other races across the country and many more of your calls after a short break with Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic. Stick around, much more to come up. The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Bridget Bergen, filling in for Brian today. I'm talking with Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic, about his latest story, The Democrats Aren't Built for This, which looks at whether the party can meet this moment. We've got a whole bunch of callers who want to weigh in. Let's start with Mike in Nyack. Mike, you're on WNYC.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for taking my call. I just want a little background. I grew up in a very blue-collar family in New York City, later served in the military, and my last job was with the federal government as a refugee officer, and I quit because of the current policies. As a voter, I've always leaned centrist. I've always voted Democrat. I've always leaned centrist in 2016 and 2020 in the primaries and the general elections. And I always thought in my mind that was the best way to win over more votes and get our candidate in. I have completely abandoned that mindset going forward. To mirror what the last caller said, I always loved Bernie Sanders, but I always thought him as not practical. I am completely done with that because I feel like when we compromise on our side, and the other side just completely goes full in, it's like we're bringing a book to a knife fight. And I'm done with it. And now I'm voting with my heart. I'm voting where I feel my values most lie. I was extremely happy to see Mamdani elected. I'm voting. I'm 100% progressive, and when I see established Democrats trying to undermine what's happening, like what I feel is Chuck Schumer and everything, it kills me. I mean, I was reading the other day that Kamala Harris was thinking about running in 2028, and it's nothing against Kamala Harris, but it's just like, what are we doing? We're just, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result. As a voter, and who's been on the front lines of watching the government, especially in the refugee context, I feel abandoned by some of the leadership, and I'm done with it, and I'm not compromising anymore. Thank you for taking my call.
Mike, thanks so much for that perspective. I want to get another caller in. Paul in Washington Heights. You're on WNYC.
Oh, good morning, and thank you for taking my call. So I've been a Democrat all my life. My parents were Democrats. And watching the two parties fight, the Republicans always had this simple elevator speech, family values, strong defense, lower taxes. What is the elevator speech of the current Democratic Party?
Paul, thank you for that question. And Mark, I like those callers together because I think they both get at some of the points you raised in your piece. This idea that there are voters who are really looking for fighters and who, are looking for people who are going to stand up for workers and for the Constitution. And then similarly, looking for some clarity around what does the party stand for. I'd love to get your reaction to both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in so much as the Democratic Party has an elevator speech for the last almost decade, it's been, we are not Donald Trump. We must be everything that he is not. And I think the other part of this, which is, I think part of the question is we must fight him. We must fight what he stands for with every tool in our arsenal. And I think that there is a great deal of frustration among Democrats that the leadership of the Democratic Party, whether it's the DNC, whether it's Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, even Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, what have you. I mean, the recent sort of generation of leadership in the party has failed miserably at that. And I think for as low as the approval rating for the administration is right now, I mean, Democrats as a party, there's not like a wave of love for the Democratic Party among Americans either. I mean, the Democratic numbers are very, very low, and I think part of the reason for that is that Democrats are extremely down on themselves, and by themselves, I mean the leadership of their party. I think what we're seeing is just a real hunger for new leadership, younger leadership, feistier leadership, and someone who can get beyond the "we are not Trump" message, which, by the way, I mean, is very powerful. I think Donald Trump remains, I think, the best thing Democrats have going for them going into this election. But at a certain point, you need value added to that, and I think that's what a lot of Democrats are frustrated by the lack of.
Mark, a listener texted, the best line from Mamdani's inauguration, when politics speaks without condescension. Gets back at what we were talking about in terms of Democrats being perceived as elites because they're condescending. What are your thoughts on sort of how the Democrats talk to their voters?
Well, I mean, I think there is definitely that perception. I mean, it's definitely out there. I mean, I think one of the great triumphs of Mamdani and his campaign is that he was able to surmount that. And I think part of it is just like good old-fashioned work ethic. Like, that guy got out there. He was everywhere. It seemed 24/7. Obviously, geographically, New York is a very conducive environment to get a whole lot of diversity in a pretty tight environment. But also, it's a very engaging city, obviously. People are open to people even they disagree with. And I think Mamdani was just really, really good at being a compelling, likable, and again, non-condescending, because he was everywhere, kind of leader that people really, really gave a close look to. And I think, not only made him a good candidate, but I think will probably speak well of how he does early on in his mayorship. So, look, I mean, I think condescension is a big problem. I mean, it also has a lot of layers. There's a lot of history built in. There's a lot of class resentment built in. And I mean, Donald Trump has been, again, it's ironic because he's a child of great privilege and great wealth. And is sort of associated with like sort of the fat cat hiring guy for his entire adult life. But I do think that he has been able to leverage grievance, and part of that grievance obviously has been economic, and the economic disengagement that many people in the country have felt.
Mark, I mentioned the Democratic Senate primary in Texas as we were starting the segment, and for listeners who are not following it as closely, can you just describe what's happening there? Tell us a little bit about the candidates and what issues you think it raises about the party.
Yeah, I mean, Texas has become just a classic sort of case study in a lot of what we're talking about here. I mean, first of all, John Cornyn, who is a incumbent Republican senator, he's been in office, I think for 2 or 3, 4 terms. I don't know how many exactly, but he's been around for a while, very much associated with the Republican establishment. I would say has had a lukewarm, not relationship with Trump, but certainly Trump and Trump world and the sort of moderate wing of the party has been quite wary of John Cornyn over the years. He has a primary challenger named Ken Paxton, who's the Attorney General of the state, who is an extremely loyal MAGA guy. He's been very much in line with the hardest core Trump voters. Has all kinds of ethical problems, legal problems, impeachment problems. I mean, what have you? I mean, a very polarizing figure in Texas. If he knocks off John Cornyn in a Republican primary, which he has a very good chance of doing, I would say, it sort of makes the seat even all the more gettable for Democrats. So on the Democratic side, you basically have 2 candidates right now. Jasmine Crockett, who is a very well-known congresswoman. She is African-American woman, very, very progressive and very, very good communicator and very, very compelling at getting, just sort of getting under Republican skin, but also inspiring Democrats and getting on TV and all the things that people in Congress just love to do. And she has quite a following right now. She's going against, I guess, someone who would be perceived as a more moderate Democrat, James Talarico, who is a state representative in Texas, who has sort of, I mean, he's an interesting kind of hybrid. I mean, he talks very openly about faith. He's a seminarian. He has made, it's gone viral on a lot of different things. I mean, it's really quite progressive in his voting record, but has sort of, has sort of cultivated a crossover appeal across the state, gotten a lot of national attention. And at this point, the two of them are locked in a pretty close fight. I mean, it hasn't gotten that combative yet, but I think it clearly will. And the polls are kind of all over the place. It's still very early, although not that early because, early voting's coming up, as you mentioned earlier. But, it really could go either way. But I think you do have, in some ways, a bit of a proxy for the head versus heart, or the kind of, base or kind of fiery appeal versus maybe a more, I don't know how you'd classify it, maybe a more reserved, but also more sort of, I don't know, maybe persuasion-based appeal, as Talarico might be going for. But anyway, I mean, it's a fascinating race, and I mean, it's getting a lot of attention. I assume it will get a lot more attention.
I'm going to bring in some callers who want to offer a little bit of pushback. Let's go to Robert in Roslyn Heights, Long Island. Robert, you're on WNYC.
Hi. I'm a longtime caller to the Brian Lehrer Show. I used to live in Manhattan Valley. Now I live in Roslyn Heights for the last 6 years in Nassau County. I disagree with some of the prior callers and a little bit with Mr. Leibovich. I think Mikey Sherrill's election, where she was taking a basic issue, electrical, pricing for electricity, the Gateway Project, sticking it to Chiarelli, who was a MAGA-ite pro-Trumpy, and he had no response. Those two issues are affordability issues, but they're popular across, let's say, New Jersey, which is basically a middle-class state, right, or upper-middle-class state. And Hochul now is doing the similar thing with auto insurance regulation, which I think is a very popular issue across almost all counties in New York, but tacking to the left on an issue like Mandani's pre-K or pre-K for all. And so I think those two visions, which is to take bread and butter issues, okay, but it's not a left-right issue, and broadening it because everybody will benefit. Now, yes, you need an attractive candidate. You need somebody who can speak well, who can articulate well, but is also does so in a friendly way. I think the Texas senatorial primary race for the Democrats is showing how you lose that, okay? And in effect, that is a different strategy. I don't think, I think attacking the senators in the minority where they have very little power to influence things other than, at the broadest base is not fair. But I think that's the way to do it. And I think Mikey Sherrill really defined that, and also how you maneuver these days against Republicans.
Robert, thanks for that. I want to bring in Deborah in Rockland County, who has another perspective.
Yes, I think that the guest is right on most issues, but I think it's important to note I've been campaigning and canvassing and making phone calls since John Kerry. I worked closely on Mikey Sherrill and Andy Kim's ability to flip those districts from red to blue. And one of the things that's important is Mikey Sherrill, when she flipped her congressional district, she called on every door twice. She literally had someone knocking on every door. So I do think that the other issue is Andy Kim took no corporate PAC money. Both of them were able to flip red districts blue. Now, do I think AOC is perfect for her district? Yes. But there isn't a one-size-fit-all. And the Democrats need to understand we need to fight each district as an individual district. And each district has its own picadillos that need to be addressed. And I'd love to hear what the guest thinks about that.
I would say, first of all, I take your points absolutely. I do think one of the victories that Mamdani ran on was just, or one of the things that led to Mamdani's victory was just affordability is essentially a bipartisan issue, right? No one is for higher prices, and he was able to speak in a language that didn't scare off the usual number of people ideologically. And I do think also local issues are huge in local races. I mean, it sounds obvious, but I do think that, you mentioned New Jersey and the Gateway Project. I mean, that is a case in point of a local issue. I mean, obviously you wouldn't talk about the Gateway Project in, say, Texas, but it is something that is both local and federal at the same time and is perfect for a statewide race, especially when someone like Cheryl comes from a national background.
I want to talk just quickly about some of the other candidates who you spoke with. You talked with Graham Plattner, who is running in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate in Maine. An imperfect candidate. Tell me why you wanted to talk to him, and what does he tell you about Democrats in this moment? Yeah, I mean, Plattner is interesting. I mean,
Susan Collins, longtime senator, Republican, always, manages to sort of defy all kinds of predictions of her doom and gets reelected. I mean, she's up this year. She's running again. And the Democrats in Washington tried very hard and succeeded in getting the incumbent governor, Democrat Janet Mills, to run. She's 78. She's in her late 70s. I think she might be 79 now. So, I mean, age is an issue with her. But she got in, but sort of before she did, Graham Plattner, who is a political neophyte, he's an oyster farmer up in Sullivan, Maine, and he's a 42-year-old former infantryman. He served many tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Very populist, very kind of a Bernie Sanders acolyte. Great speaker. Bernie did a rally with him in Portland and just kind of knocked the place out. Got all kinds of money, all kinds of attention. Then all of a sudden, as happens when lightning gets caught in a bottle like that, I mean, controversy sort of follows him, especially when you have a long online history. There was some problematic old texts about him characterizing rural voters as racist and dumb and so forth. There was a tattoo that he has. Or I guess it was associated with a Nazi tattoo that he explained he didn't realize about. He got it covered over. I mean, a lot of controversies popped up around him, but Plattner has sort of retained a lot of support. I mean, he's proven pretty durable. He still out there. Him and Mills, again, polls are kind of all over the place, but they seem to be pretty well locked in a pretty close race for both of them. And Plattner, I spent a day with him on his oyster boat. It was September. It was not winter like right now, so I wouldn't be on his oyster boat right now, and I don't think he would be either. But yeah, no, he is again kind of a classic kind of guy who generates a whole lot of excitement out of nowhere. Again, aligned very much with the progressives, Bernie Sanders, and his trajectory has been pretty fascinating. And he's still here. He's competitive. It looks like he's braved a lot of these controversies. It's unclear if this will get him the nomination, and if it's unclear whether this would sink him in the general election against Susan Collins if he gets that far.
So another great race to watch. We're going to get one more caller in. Sunny in New Orleans. Sunny, you have about 30 seconds. You're on WNYC.
Okay. Hi. I just wanted to just say something. So I'm very progressive, but I'm also very pragmatic. I've lived in Ohio, New York, and now I live back in New Orleans. I really resent the fact that this gentleman presents a voice that rubs me the wrong way. The base of the Democratic Party is Black women and minorities. Why is somebody talking to Canton, Ohio, to 1,000 voters more reflective of the average Democratic voter? And he keeps saying, well, New York is different, but he spent most of the time talking about Mondani. People like me, I'm an Asian immigrant. I vote Democratic, I canvass, I volunteer. And for him to say something like, oh, New York's different. Oh, we talked about that. I lived in Ohio near Canton. I know what that area is like. It's very white. It's not diverse. And for him to say that, he's like, oh, we're seen as elitist. No, we're not seen as elitist. The Republicans have convinced their base, who they always cater to. The Democrats never say, oh, we appreciate our base. They're always like, how can we get more moderates to join us? How can we get the MAGA to join us? Instead of saying, let's also protect our base, which is what the Republicans always do. But to hear a man come on a New York City show and it's like, well, New York's different. But we really found out, and there's this great guy who talked to 1,000 people in Canton. I'm so glad that we're talking to everybody. But the Republicans don't throw away their base the way the Democrats do. And I'm sick and tired of it.
Sonny, I want to get some response to you since we're running out of time in this segment. Mark, some pushback there. And you do get at some of this in the piece about this perception that, Democrats are, because it's a Big Ten party, they are concerned about, trying to keep all of the different, parts of their base happy. And they do run a risk of alienating someone like this voter, Sonny, who just called in.
Yeah, no, look, there is alienation that runs in a lot of different directions here. And I certainly, I don't want to minimize at all the points Sonny's making here. Especially around African-American women, men. That's the base of the party and has been one of the more durable bases for decades and continues to this day, Democrats hope. So I would say, look, my only point in saying New York is different is that New York is different, which is, look, it's different in that it is more progressive than the rest of the country. It's different in that it receives outsized attention than cities around the country do. And I think, look, people were talking about Bill de Blasio running for president when he was elected, within weeks of him being elected. And he did run for president. People were saying similar things about Eric Adams. New York mayors run for president, whether it's, Michael Bloomberg, Rudy Giuliani, what have you. So I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there with Sonny's point. I would only say that, yes, when you have a big unruly party, it's hard to make general statements. And maybe that's the peril I ran into here.
Well, there's a lot to digest in his latest. Mark Leibovich is a staff writer at The Atlantic. We were talking about his piece, The Democrats Aren't Built for This. He's also author of 5 books, including his latest, Thank You for Your Servitude. Mark, I'll tell you, your football book is very popular in my house. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Oh, thank you for saying that. You made my day, Bridget.
You're welcome. My husband told me I had to tell you, so now I checked that.
Thank your husband for me, and I'd much rather talk about football than all this stuff. But unfortunately, this seems more important these days, especially now that the season's over. Hey, great to be with you anytime, and all the best to you, Bridget.
Thank you. Coming up next, New York City nurses at Montefiore and Mount Sinai will end their strike. They've reached a deal with hospital execs, but the strike will go on at New York Presbyterian. We'll talk about where things stand with the president of the New York State Nurses Association coming up. Stick around.